Hello and welcome to the December 2020 layout update for the Trent Valley Railway. In this update we'll take a look at the metal adapters in the top of the containers, metal adapter equipment, which I've got a screw and then two barrel nuts. We'll look at the latest DCC loco to have DCC sound fitted, which is this class 67. And finally, we'll take a look at the latest section of backscene that I have installed behind the container depot. This backscene in the centrepiece here covers the breeze blocks in the centre of the garage and also the power point. In this month's update, it's been quite cold outside, so I haven't had too much chance to get out here and do some work, but I have been taking some of the rolling stock inside and looking then at getting the containers with a detail on them, and also looking to adapt the Tesco container train so that the whole train can be moved off the rake of container flats when it arrives into the container depot. Let's now take a look at the work I've been doing to adapt the containers so that they can be moved by the Haugen container crane. For the Haugen container crane to pick up the containers, there are two magnets in the hoist area, in that brown section, and this then picks up the containers. So the original Haugen containers, which are also HO scale and not 20 foot here, but these have the two dots on the top, which are obviously the part of the metal plate that is then inside of this, and that metal plate protrudes through to create the magnetic source between the container and the hoist. So I've looked at how that has been put together and tried to replicate this myself in the Stobart and less CO2 rail containers. We'll now have a look at that and what I've done to modify them and put in that metal adapter. The process to adapt each of these containers start with drilling a size 8 hole with a drill piece. That is then drilled at the required distance between those two holes, which matches up with the magnetic points on the container hoist, but also centralised in the middle of the container to make sure that the container crane isn't off balance when it's moving the containers. Looking at this from the opposite side, you'll see that then I've taken the bottom off these Oxford die-cast containers with less CO2 and Stobart rail on the side of them, and after that I've got access to then put in my metal adapter equipment, which I've got a screw and then two barrel nuts. The size of the barrel nut on the flat size is just sort of slightly bigger than the magnetic points on the hoist for the container crane, and then the screw goes and connects those two barrels together. And as I fit them, I also need to adapt the inside of the container, where obviously there's plastic strengthening there, and just cut that out. Glue the two dowels for the barrel nuts either side with the screw, obviously creating that connectivity between those two pieces of metal then that come out on top of the container. That then makes sure that the whole piece within the container is obviously going to be charged up through the magnetic energy on the hoist. Now I've used zinc plated steel and that seems to work. I've used different types of obviously metal in the past with screws, but hopefully this now is sort of quite reliable in the way that it works. You'll see that the two barrel nuts pieces of metal very much like the halogen container that I showed you at the start of this bit, then show up on the top of the containers. Obviously you don't see this from the side, but they're just about flush with the top of the container so that the hoist can do its operations of taking these containers on and off the trains. So what we'll now see in this update is just a quick train coming into the container depot area. I'll then load it up with the containers, and then you'll be able to see that all sped up, because it takes quite a while, as you'll see through this, to get the operations of the container crane quite right and line all this up for the containers to be on top of the actual train wagons. So do enjoy this next section of the update. The latest DCC Sound locomotive for the Trent Valley Railway is this Class 67. I've installed the TTS sound from Hornby, which is now very difficult to get hold of, but managed to get one that is working and doesn't have any faults with it. They are quite temperamental as well, so I've read through the reviews, but they come with the 8-pin adapter to just plug into the PCB board within this loco. So what I'll do is I'll just start this up and you'll be able to see this in a few running shots here, working on my VSOE Pullman coaches set, where I've got around about 10 coaches behind this 67. I'm pleased with how the sound is in this 67, but I will say I've done a lot of work to make sure that the train you've just seen can run on my layout. So if we just move the 67 on slightly, we'll look at what I've had to do to the coaches. Each of these Pullman coaches for the couplings has been modified. So if we just take the loco off for 2 seconds and have a look at the work that I've done. At the end of each of these bogies, there was an area in around the tension lock coupling that basically meant that whenever the bogie moved, the tension lock coupling would move with it, a bit like what you're seeing there. Now, I've modified the bogie and had to cut away a lot of the plastic here so that it can operate up and down the incline. So it's okay on a flat with only a few coaches, but obviously under tension of a 10 coach train, and also going up and down the inclines and around the corners on the layout that I have, I need for the coupling to be independent of the bogie. So I've made those changes, and I've done that for each and every single one of the coaches in this rake, which took quite a while to make sure that I wasn't breaking the bogies, but as you've just seen, that works rather nicely now, and that can run with this 67. So now let's look at the work I've been doing for the back scene in the centre of the container depot. Following on from the back scene that I installed in the last layout update, this back scene in the centerpiece here covers the breeze blocks in the centre of the garage and also the power point, but I've put in some smart plugs there so I can still turn on and off the power without having to take that off or reach far down behind this back scene board. So this is a continuation of the sky scene here, and eventually I will have a very sort of medium relief warehouse that will sit basically to probably the height of the 3 container stack at the moment, just for the time being, before I find the sort of right materials to sort of probably scratch build that container warehouse on this area. I've just put some containers just stacked up onto the back wall for the time being. Eventually I'll continue to extend this back scene all the way down to the other end of the garage, but for the time being, as I've said in the previous update, I'm now going to concentrate on getting sort of this end of the scenic section to sort of near finished state, and start to work on some of the other areas around the container depot. So, as I said, unfortunately not much on the layout in terms of progress, but a lot of this year has been about making sure that the layout works and operates how I want it to. I think I've made quite a fair bit of progress in that respect over this year, but next year we're going to focus in on then getting now the scenery done on this section here, particularly first of all around the container depot, and then move to the other end of the scenic section. So thank you to all the comments and feedback throughout this whole of 2020. There'll be more layout updates next year in 2021, and until then, keep an eye out for more videos from the Trent Valley Railway. Cheers.